Hello and welcome to the Thursday Process. I'm your host, Ian Richardson, and we're going to be joined today by my friend Michael Bommarito. Michael's the CTO and co-founder of License.io, and he'll be joining us in just a second. Being another entrepreneur, he's finishing up a sales call, so I got nothing but grace for that. I'm going to give us a couple of minutes before we get started. We'll get started right at around 11:32. And be diving into the topic of evaluating data for monetization. So we'll be getting started in just a couple of minutes. So if you need a cup of coffee, glass of water, something like that, snack, go ahead and grab it. 11:32 Eastern, or 2 minutes past the half hour, is when we'll get started. Thanks for tuning in. For those of you who are just joining, welcome to the Thursday Process. We're going to get started in just about 60 seconds. We're waiting on Michael to arrive, but that's okay. He should be here any second now. He's finishing up a previous meeting. Been chatting with him on the phone. So you're in the right place. We will be diving in here in just a minute's time. So if you need a glass of water, cup of coffee, anything like that, go ahead and grab it, and then we'll get started. Okay, it's 11:32, so while we're waiting for Michael to pop in, you'll see his face pop up. We'll go ahead and get started and take care of some of the housekeeping items. This is the Thursday Process. Today we're diving into a process for evaluating data for the potential of monetization of that data, making money from it in one way, shape, or form. So let's go ahead and dive in. Presentations on the Thursday Process are intended for educational purposes only and should not replace independent professional advice or your own personal judgment. Statements of facts and opinions expressed are those of the participants individually. They do not represent the opinion or position of their employers or certifying bodies. Nothing presented should be considered legal or financial advice. I want to draw special attention to that. We're talking about data collection, data monetization. One thing we don't touch on in this process is the need for solid legal counsel, both about your data collection practices, your data privacy practices, and if you're allowed to sell data at all in any way, shape, or form. So not a lawyer. This is not a legal session. This isn't legal advice. Make sure that you talk to legal counsel before you do anything regarding data. One final note, you may be watching this on demand. If so, please consider that the information has not been changed or updated since the original presentation. Today is February 9th, 2023. It's 11:33 Eastern Time. We're not updating this presentation from today's date and today's time. A little bit of housekeeping as we get started. Hey, Michael, how you doing?
Hi there. Good, thank you.
So we're just getting started. A little bit of housekeeping for everyone. There's polls that pop up. They will automatically come up. These polls are what steer and guide our content for the webinar series. So please do respond to them. That's how Carrie and I recruit new guests, come up with new topics, etc., to present back. There's question and answers. Go ahead and ask questions live in the Q&A box. Don't hold them back. Michael and I will stitch them into the conversation as we run through the webinar. So ask away. Last but not least, there's the handout section. You'll see the process we're talking about today. You can follow along. I will call out process points or things like that as Michael and I talk about them if you want to follow along the document. But don't forget to download that process so you have it. Without further ado, let's introduce everyone here. I'm Ian Richardson. I'm one half of Richardson & Richardson, along with my wife, Carrie. I ran and operated a managed services company out of the mid-Michigan region for about 16 years, sold at the end of 21, and co-founded R&R to do the final rodeo with an eye on making an impact in the IT channel. And I'm joined today by my friend, Mike Bommarito, who came in right at the wire. And as I was saying before he joined, he was closing a sale. And being a lifelong salesperson, I got nothing but grace for closing the deal. So now, Mike, we got to ask live on the air, you going to win?
I think we're going to be okay for a variety of reasons here. So it's never actually pushed to that part of the pipeline and marked as closed until the ink is dry or the DocuSign is filed. But
That's right.
I feel pretty good about it. So
that's nice. That's my sister-in-law, Tracy Arisco. She's famous for saying the only thing that matters is the signature on the line that is dotted. Until then, it's not closed. So,
yep.
So, a little bit of background here. Mike is the co-founder and CTO of License.io, and you and your business partner and wife Jillian have spent a lot of time in the financial industry. And when we were prepping for this webinar, you were mentioning to me that you'd come across a business, and sometimes that business is just a guy who's got this valuable source of data that they've collected. And that could be satellite data about empty spots in a parking lot in a mall, or maybe dude like sat in his car with, a bag of chips and counted empty rail cars on a train. And they've been able to monetize that data for tens of thousands of dollars a pop and make a boatload of money from it. And that created a realization for you both that, hey, there's this massive strategic asset around data, and you guys pursued it as a focus. So just tell us a little bit, give us a little bit more insight into that, and how you guys really narrowed in and said, you know what, data is where we're going to live. This is what we're going to do.
Yeah, it's been a journey, to put it lightly, and one where, to be honest, at the beginning, the experience was from the buyer side, right? So working in financial services, organizations in financial services need a lot of data, right? To do things like trend customer demand, to guess, or to more than guess, to predict whether or not interest rates are going to go up, to estimate whether or not a certain type of mortgage or commercial real estate in certain areas are going to be more or less risky. Trading, everybody hears about trading, right? And what hedge funds or algorithmic traders do. So in all these different areas that we kind of have been through in one way or another, people would pay a lot of money. For example, a hedge fund I used to work at, we spent more money outside of labor on data sources, on paying people for data. And yeah, sometimes the source of data would be a guy who, like you said, would sit with some Fritos in an old pickup next to the rail yard, and he'd try to see, is CSX running empty? Are the return legs full of just rusty iron with nothing on top? And that would be an important predictor in some situations for, let's say, CSX's profits, or for whether or not the economy was expanding or contracting in Metro New Jersey or whatever, right? And like that realization, first of all, the pain point of paying that much money for that data, turning into the realization of, wow, you can create a lot of value with not a lot of traditional capital or expense if you're just really strategic about finding something to measure that's worth measuring and connecting that to somebody who's willing to pay for that measurement. I mean, in essence, that's it. And my wife, Jill, and the CEO of our company was a public accountant, did tax consulting and stuff for big Fortune 50 companies. Same thing there, right? The corporates will pay exorbitant amounts of money for some of these data sources, and it would often come back at the end of the day to a very small number of people who do something very purposeful and strategic, that you sit there and you say, wow, I wonder what their margins are. I can imagine they're pretty good. So it was that experience. We've previously founded companies. We've built companies up to, let's say, the 30-person org size. We've worked with some of the largest companies in the world. We know what it's like to advise companies that have very large teams. And we said, what kind of organization would we like to be, not just kind of investors in, but operators of? And this was that kind of organization, working with data, in and around data, helping people create data assets and then maximize value on the way or terminal value when they exit.
Yeah, and this hits home, and we'll kind of dive into this a little bit. That's one of the ways that this conversation bubbled up is Mike and I started having a conversation about the Richardson and Richardson database that's been matured about the managed services industry over the past 10 years. And so it's this is a topic that's near and dear to me because we're doing it and we're living it. So let's dive in. For those of you following along, we're just moving down into the process section. And one of the biggest things that resonated with me was when we were talking, Mike, a huge portion of the process you guys use for seeing, hey, do you have a, for lack of a better term, do you have a ball game? Can you monetize this data in a material way to either sell it as a product, right? Resell your data or something, or use it to support your operations and then use it as a force multiplier on exit of your business. A huge portion of it is perspective based. The first two whole steps of the process are, hey, where are you at? Where are you, the entrepreneur, at, or entrepreneurs at? Where's your organization at? Where's your culture at? Talk to us about how you guys consult and help people figure out, like, what's the current state of your organization with regards to data.
Yeah, and I'll be honest and upfront and say, to some degree, this is just habit for us because we were, for better or worse, brought up in that kind of Big Four, McKinsey, BCG world where every first engagement is like the current state.
Mm-hmm.
I also spent a lot of time in and around organizations that were CMMI, right? So organizations that think very specifically about maturity models and might have an industry or activity specific maturity model. And I'm not a deep believer in any one of those things. I don't believe in like a BCG or McKinsey or a CMMI approach to this stuff, but I do think there's a lot of merit to thinking in a systematic way with somebody about that maturity level, which is kind of a businessy word, but basically being honest about where are you both relative to some absolute capabilities and relative to your peers, and what does that mean about um, whether or not this is feasible, right? Whether you've got a ball game, and whether or not this is a journey that you're really interested in either taking at all, or whether this is a good time for that journey. So when you work with an organization and they're a little bit further up the maturity scale, they seem like they are really ready to take that next step, and you
Mm-hmm.
are on the same page with them about that, that's obviously the perfect kind of engagement. If you don't think that they're ready to take the next step, or the next step is going to require a larger investment, either from them or just kind of in an absolute sense, then it's obviously critical that all of the stakeholders involved, us as consultants or advisors, not wanting to mislead you or to set you up for failure, and you as the organization thinking about whether you want to take this journey, to have full information about where you're at.
Yeah, that's that really, that focus on and it does stem from enterprise on, hey, we gotta know where we're at before we can even talk about where we want to go. Really resonates home with me. For those that know me on the webcast, I'm a Patterson Stratop guy, and Tom Patterson built Stratop back in the 80s, and it stemmed from the enterprise of enterprise, RCA and IBM. So it doesn't get bigger than good old Big Blue, in at least in the tech space. And one of Tom's principles was perspective before planning. Always, you have to know where you are before you can even hope to plan on where you want to go. Because without that good, solid current state, you don't know what you need to do to achieve your goals. You have to have that perspective. And so one of the key pieces that I want to highlight, and I talked about this during the disclaimer, but I'd just like to bring it back up, is around reviewing what are your current collection practices with regards to data and things like that. And so again, with a big disclaimer, this is not legal advice. I wanna bring that up and then kind of Michael, if you have a story you could share or some experiences you could share around the severity of this, I think it would be valuable. But like, go get a lawyer. Is if you're looking at step 2, part D, do you need a lawyer to review your collection practices? The answer is yes, right? That's a that's almost a rhetorical question, but it's becoming more and more important to have solid legal strategy as part of this play, is it not?
Yeah, and there are different kinds of hallmarks of things where
Mhm.
you should really get an attorney, or you need to have a plan to have legal counsel available. Obviously, if you're collecting information from consumers, right, like a traditional B2C kind of business, or data
Mhm.
collection, even if it's not a commercial thing, right, you might just be collecting free data. That tends to be higher risk. If you have minors, or if there's any way that you're not able to separate minors or some other kind of special class, then the threat level is rising from a threat risk modeling perspective. Generally, B2B isn't as dangerous for a number of reasons, but all this stuff is conditional on the state or states that you or your clients, or the individuals you're collecting on are in, and
Mhm.
what you're actually collecting, right? Even if it's B2B, if it's the ACH information, for that company, then that's still got to be treated with, let's say, with special considerations. So we have um, we have a lot of attorneys we work with. Jill is also a CIPP, which is the organization that certifies CPAs and JDs around privacy. Privacy regulations tend to be the place where you're most likely to have an issue, other than at exit. And at
Mhm.
exit is where this stuff often comes up, because when you're operating, people don't tend to go through your contracts, right? Like, you're not having a third party regularly diligence every agreement you have to see whether or not it allows you to reuse the data you collect from a customer. It tends to only show up, unfortunately, at the end, when you've kind of, frequently already anchored a price, either internally yourself, or you and
Mhm.
your potential acquirer have acquired, or your potential acquirer have anchored a price, and it's their attorneys who find some kind of some issue that's not like a de minimis issue, like it's a more material issue. And that is, unfortunately, often when this occurs. The worst case, I'll give a public example that's not one of our clients. Weight Watchers acquired a company,
Mhm.
and that company had built an app that helped minors, or at least some of their customers were minors, lose weight. And it turns out that they had done that and then reused that data to build machine learning models that Weight Watchers was then using. And all of
Huh.
this ended up turning into an FTC action. So the federal government got involved. It pursued, essentially like suing them, right? But an action of
Yeah.
the government here. And the end result was a multi-million-dollar fine, and they had to actually destroy all the assets. So they were under a disgorgement order where they had to delete every line of code, every model, remove it from the app store, remove from their software, their web applications. So the extreme form of this is, you go all the way through an acquisition, the acquiring company gets sued, loses millions of dollars, has to delete the thing that you built, and then you, as the seller, may be liable from a rep and warranty perspective to make the acquiring company whole. So things can go more than just a little bit wrong. Again, if you're collecting data about kids, that's where in particular you run the risk of coming afoul. But it can happen anywhere you don't have the
Mhm.
right from a contract perspective with the people you collected it from, or where there might be a law or a rule that prevents you from either collecting it in the first place or from doing something downstream.
Yeah. So just get that solid legal advice, because nobody wants to have to come back to the table after they've been spending their exit money months or years even down the road, and have a little knock on the door saying, "Hey, congratulations, you owe us quite a bit of cash from this contract."
Yep.
So thinking about collecting data, and everyone on this webinar and everyone who's viewing this on demand, you all collect data. If you're an IT MSP, you have a huge amount of valuable data at your fingertips. And it's not just around your own operations, it's around your clients' operations. If you support 50 medical practices and you look at your incident management system and you're noticing that healthcare is struggling with rooming patients, that's valuable insight that you have that one of your competitors does not. And you can use that as a go-to-market strategy to capture more of the market share in healthcare. That is one of the ways that, in a very, very immature way, that I grew my MSP was that exact scenario, and popping into it. But talk to us about action plans, and hey, we know where we're at. We know what our collection practices are. We know what our culture is. We've got at least a prelim green light, like, hey, let's go grab some data. Let's do some stuff. So talk to us about action planning. What are some of the key points that people have to take into consideration as they build an action plan around data collection and use?
Yeah, I think there's a couple easy things to remember, some of which are not going to be new things, right? So garbage in, garbage out. It's
Mm-hmm.
so easy to underinvest for a variety of reasons, whether it's investing in the culture of data quality or investing in actual software or other supporting data to help validate. And if you don't operationalize that culture of data quality, or at least put in place systems to clean up or to ensure that bad data isn't entered, it's just the natural state, right? People trying to save time, everybody's overworked. It's even when people act in good faith, they may not know what the right data format or the right field values are supposed to be. And
Mm-hmm.
so operationalization of this stuff, building an action plan, it has to really be infused with that garbage in, garbage out caveat all the way through. But for the most part, these action plans are let's just imagine you know what you want to build, right? You've got a product idea in mind. You work backwards to what kind of data you need to collect, or maybe you went the other way. You have the data and you came up with an idea to sell. You're going to need a few things. You're going to need some kind of human capability to make that happen. Some of that's sales at the end. Some of that
Mm-hmm.
is a person collecting data at the front or a system collecting data at the front. And then generally, you need somebody to help structure the data, to help create a derivative of the data, like an average or some kind of aggregate statistic. And then you almost always need a way to communicate or distribute that, which again typically comes back to somebody like a developer or an analyst to send that. And so the action plans tend to turn into a matrix of some kind or a grid that outlines along that process, but like a swim lane. Do you
Mm-hmm.
have a person today who has the required skill or skills in that map to get to the endpoint, where the endpoint is somebody's buying and continuing to pay for a data asset that you're licensing or selling them? So
Yeah. And that highlighting one area on there is just, whether you've got humans or systems or a combination of both doing that collection, you have to have pretty rock solid procedure around what the quality standard is. And this resonates heavy, and highlighting this being a process oriented webinar series. This should exist in every single process, right? Define what good looks like. If you're collecting 5 data points, what does a good sample of those data points look like, right? It's, is it full name, or is it first name, last initial for a contact database, right? Do you have to have the email every time, or will a phone number suffice? Don't assume that the people who are doing the actions will have the same knowledge as the strategists coming up with this plan around the data, whatever that plan might be. You got to make sure that everyone's playing on the same page. So we've been collecting data, and I can use Richardson and Richardson for an example here. We've been collecting data for a good 9, 10 years across multiple organizations. And so we've got all this data. We've gone through some initial review. We've set up some procedures. We've set up some rules around what we do, and created some structure and invested in systems. We've been collecting data for a bit. What do we do next, right? Like you've collected data for weeks, months, years, whatever. What's the next step in taking data and analyzing that towards, hey, how are we going to go to market?
Yeah. I think there's different ways to do this. I mean, there's an experimental forward way where you you explore the information with an open mind. You don't necessarily go into this with a known customer or a known product, and you live the data. And honestly, every data project, if you hire a data scientist or you do this yourself, there's no better way to avoid downstream regret, missing product market fit, hitting a data quality issue, then just diving in. There's no other way to really do this anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, obviously we've seen a lot of movement in terms of what artificial intelligence is capable of lately, but a human needs to take a dive into that data and live the data. And if you're the business owner and you know the data and you're the one responsible for eventually making decisions about product market fit or go to market, then I really typically recommend that you're the one who lives the data at least a little bit at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And so step one is somebody needs eyes on for a variety of reasons. And often it is better if the business owner, operator, the strategist spends at least some time in there,
Mm-hmm.
because it's regret minimizing, if you will, later on. The the next thing that'll typically happen in an exploratory approach like that is you'll go through every field, you'll go through every row. Maybe you'll see that you have an industry field. Maybe you'll see something like, here's how many activities or tasks or incidents there are by industry. And maybe you'll say, hey, we got a lot of data on, kind of like your example about healthcare. We've got a lot of information about these three industries, and we think that more incidents or more tasks in this industry might either be directly useful for that industry, like maybe I can help them do planning for when or where they need more nurses, or where they need to think
Mm-hmm.
about an expansion, or which facilities they might want to end the lease on and find another facility nearby. Or it might be for somebody who services them or is a counterpart to them. So another example would be, you work with a logistics company, you help them with some kind of incident management. There are insurers, insurance and reinsurance companies, who are probably footing the bill on something every time there's an incident or an outage, when they
Mm-hmm.
can't deliver to the plant, or when the truck runs into something, or when some system goes down. There's a guy on the other end of the CGL policy who is paying for business interruption or for some claim, and they might be interested in that as a leading source of data or for underwriting purposes.
Yep.
So normally it really, in that forward sense where you're just exploring the data, you have a data asset you've collected, there's no better way to do this than to have somebody who knows the business, like the operator, in
Mm-hmm.
the data, looking at it themselves with an open mind.
Yeah, and those last two words, having an open mind, really kind of ring true. I'm guessing that that more often than not, when looking at a data, there might be some pre-built assumptions where someone's collected a bunch of data, and then after diving in, it's well, these assumptions might not be 100% accurate, or might not even be in the realm of possibility, and there's probably a pretty big scale there.
Yeah. And I mean, it's frequently why the first step uh, really has to be the person in that role looking at the
Mhm.
data, because there is very frequently um, a realization that happens where they find out the thing that they thought had a certain kind of quality or quantity or applicability isn't meeting one of those three kind of pillars. And so there is a serious question about feasibility. Now, for the most part, if you've got a lot of data, there's almost always something you can do with it. It may just be about realigning either expectation about the product or the market or the scale of what you're doing. So it's the number one way you make a mistake. Like if you're a consultant who does stuff in data, skipping that step is the number one way you end up with dissatisfaction for yourself downstream and for your client.
Well, and so once you've got your plan, you've got your data, the data's collected, the data's been quote unquote massaged into whatever form it needs to be. You've got some operationalized procedures. You've got the right culture. You've got the right fit. You've had that legal counsel. It's action time, right? Like we've got this pool. We've got it in a way, and there's a lot of different ways that you can use data, and I think it's worthwhile spending a couple of minutes just exploring some of the more, if we think about the audience of this webinar, these are IT professionals. So we got some pretty smart guys who either themselves or on their team or through their networks know quite a bit of people who are familiar with data, databases, data manipulation. So there's a lot of talent that's going to be consuming in this content. What are some of the most frequent and successful ways for a smaller organization? So organizations maybe with 10 to 50 employees, or even 5 to 10 employees. What are some of the ways that some of those smaller organizations can take successful actions with the data they've collected and formatted that you've seen and that you've assisted with?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in terms of the cheat codes or the heuristics for success, if you already have the data and you've already got it structured, I think the trying to have conversations early helps. Trying to go to market with one or two friendlies and seeing if they have a need or a use for the data helps, because you often develop a lot of internal opinions or ideas about stuff, and there's nothing like testing this, right? No
Mm-hmm.
plan survives first contact. So you really need to start there. And then frequently, if you pick the right initial partner for that conversation, just thinking in this space, maybe a larger IT vendor, a supplier you frequently work with, someone like that, then often those early conversations, assuming you don't, again, give away the whole cow, can turn into larger potential buyers, a source of funding to, they'll actually pay you to build out any additional investment you might need. And at the end of the day, they may be your terminal option, right? The company that ends up buying the asset or buying your whole business. So, to the extent you can try to have strategic conversations where you um, early on, especially at that size, find two or three potential acquiring companies for the asset or your company and get them as an early user, as early feedback. I think that's the best thing, because reality is most organizations at that size uh, are not going to fully operationalize the infrastructure required to scale some of these data businesses. It's kind of a thing. It requires focus. It requires developers
Mm-hmm.
who understand a number of different types of development. You need people to actually keep the systems up. There's customer support. There's ongoing legal. Often the data assets are good assets to think about spinning out, putting into joint ventures, or they help give you, like you said earlier, a force multiplier on that exit that you were going to get anyway. But instead of just getting a services revenue multiple, you get either a higher multiple or you get a blended valuation that has another component that helps really stick the landing, if you will.
No. And so one of the key parts before we kind of move into, hey, how are you gonna, what are some of the management practices that we might want to explore? Um, I'd love to spend a couple of minutes talking about trends, models, observations, what have you. Um, one of my favorite Mark Twain quotes, which is incredibly popular out there, and I know that you know exactly where I'm going with it, is that there are three types of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. And that really does ring true with data, because if you could have 10 different people look at the same section of, or the same data set, and I'm imagining it is entirely possible, if not probable, to have 10 different interpretations of that data. So talk to me about the mindset that you try to take when you look at data, uh, and say, "Hey, how are we going to be able to actionably use some of the patterns we identify?" Because the pattern, everyone will see the same pattern. Hey, this is happening. Your average wait time in your healthcare practice waiting room has increased from 10 minutes per patient to 40 minutes per patient. That's just a number. What's that mean?
Yep.
And the what's that mean is where the subjectivity comes in.
Yeah, and there's a reason that storytelling is a word that's often associated with data these days, and I don't think there's any better word for it, right? I mean, in a story, like traditional, not or fiction uh,
Hmm.
literature, you kind of have the setup, the part where you outline who are the characters, what are the assumptions, what events occurred until we got here, right? Like you said, that's where you lay down some of these facts that are just truly objective statements of fact, like wait time is increasing.
Yep.
Then you add a little bit of color to that. So depending on where you want the story to go, you might say, but you have 3 times as many customers now, or 7 times as many customers. And so your wait time's going up, but it's because you have, let's go with the latter example, you have 7 times as many customers showing up every day. So per customer, maybe your wait time has gone down, and depending on how you normalize that. That would be one way to take that story, right? And
Hmm.
the same, that data could lead you towards a, well, you've gotten to be more efficient, and so great, you've been more efficient. Um, on the flip side, somebody could say you need a larger waiting room, or
Hmm.
there's an issue with your staff is not responsive. Without additional information, we don't really know in that example, right? And that's where the storytelling is often troubled, I guess we could say, by the goals that we have or the assumptions. If you want to say that there's a problem, then obviously you'll probably end up with that version of the story where you say, why are people waiting longer? And you won't do a little bit more work or research to find out that the reason people are waiting longer is because you actually have way more people showing up, and per person, they're actually maybe relative to the scaling of the daily traffic, not actually that bad. So understanding not just the data, but the intent or the
Hmm.
assumptions behind the scenes is obviously critically to consuming the information. And when you are telling a story, you obviously can think about all of those things and I don't want to say manipulate, but do your best to help the person you're talking to see the world the same way that you do. So if you've ever seen a pitch deck, a lot of a pitch deck, or when you're navigating an exit, is really storytelling, and your job is to present data about your operations and your financials in a way that justifies the valuation that you hope to get. And that's essentially this, right? You do that same thing with your customers when you try to sell them on value propositions. You say, look, today you've got an efficiency of X and you can service Y customers. Our software or our managed service contract will help you um, increase your efficiency, and that means either more customers or lower costs, and that's worth Z to you, and our product cost is much less than Z. So look at all the value that you're creating by entering into this contract or whatever. So keeping keeping that story holistically on track with a desired goal is also essentially the art of selling, right?
Hmm.
It just happens sometimes you have real hard data that you can sell with, like you've done a case study on your product in that exact industry, and you can say customers like you see X and Y in terms of improvement in real dollars and cents, or it might be more qualitative. But
Yeah, and that the what really resonated with me is that when you're going in and looking at your data and analyzing, hey, here are the patterns, here are the trends, here are the facts that have bubbled up from this data set. When you come to a conclusion, it sounds like you almost need to have an intentional next step of, all right, document down that conclusion, but then is that conclusion an assumption? Where's that conclusion coming from? So almost challenging your conclusion and saying, how am I arriving at this endpoint? How did I arrive at this result? And if you can take that step back and look in the mirror, you might come to better results, or reaffirm your result, or discard your result. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, right. I mean, in some sense, if you like a lot of people are probably familiar with Kaizen or continuous improvement, it's a lot of security frameworks. It's not much different than that, right? You've got this plan to act kind of style loop, and you can add more letters, fewer letters, use Japanese characters to represent them if you want, depending on what you believe in terms of your frameworks. But at the end of the day, it is um, collecting some information, often as a result of acting, assessing that information, then synthesizing or coming to a conclusion, doing it again over and over again. Maybe you hit steady state and you think you got it down and the world around you is not changing and you're in flow state or whatever. Or maybe you didn't collect enough data or you did the wrong thing and you keep changing until you feel like you get to that flow state. So,
Mhm. So, thinking about management, we should, and for those of you following along in the document, popping down to the management section, there were four big areas that you shared. Hey, there's some real key considerations. There's four key considerations here. There's QA around quality, or quality assurance around quality, collection practices, organization structure, and presentation. Talk to us about data quality and data collection practices. You and I dove into this, and we talked quite a bit about, hey, you need to have a policy in your organization around collection and data quality and procedures to support it. This garbage in, garbage out. There has to be, for the folks here on the call, again with limited resources. I'm imagining that QA and collection validation could rely mostly on software with human management of exception.
yep. So one of the things that we've done, I had prior companies had a lot of time around open source, commercial open source. I was like a Linux contributor 20 years ago, a bunch of stuff like this. And so we open source a number of different assets. One of the things we've open sourced is a responsible data science policy, which is designed to do a couple things.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, we have a couple assets, process diagrams, policies, procedures, spreadsheets, all the usual kind of artifacts. And they do that. Like you said, they set some standards. There's some basic tools or systems. Often for most organizations, that's an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Sheet. And they give you a framework for a standards-based process with exceptions and approvers when something needs to change. And first of all, that's an asset that you can just get for free off of GitHub or from our website, and I think answers a lot of the kinds of things here that you'd need. But yeah, I think for most organizations, even past 5 to 10, 50 people, even sometimes 100-person organizational units, a good Excel spreadsheet or Google Sheet with validation of the fields in the columns and version control is is more than enough, right? Then
Mm-hmm.
it combines with culture and a little bit of QC and produces a lot of value. On the flip side, if you have, I know many of the kinds of organizations who are probably listening have somebody on the team who's been learning Python or JavaScript or has built a web app on the side or has taken a boot camp
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. This is a perfect project for that kind of person to build a little system, a data collection system, a validation tool that you can use one, it keeps that person interested and active in the organization instead of maybe lateraling or going to a different place or career. And two, it aligns everybody and lets you experience that journey of building a tool, using the tool, continuously improving on the tool, and then hopefully for you as the owner operator, either getting higher efficiency and cash flow out of the business as a result of it, or when you go to sell someday, you can show that tool as a part of why you're worth X, not something less than X.
Mm-hmm. And so the last piece of management is presentation. And hey, like you've got all this data, you've organized the data, you've structured the data, you've scrubbed the data or cleaned it, what have you. You got to be able to use it, right?
Yeah.
That's a key piece. Is you could have all the data in the world, but if it's not put into, if you're looking at 50,000 rows or 50,000, a list of 50,000 companies, and there's 20 columns and entries across all of that, that does nothing to any human at all, right? Like anyone's going to look at that and go, yeah, okay, this is noise. You have to organize the Legos and build a house, so to speak. So talk a little bit about presentation, and then I want to shift gears and have you talk around the case study example you gave us, you gave me during our prep call around CVEs and Linux distros to kind of give people like the whole story on what we're doing.
Sure. So presentation often comes back to product market a fit and then the actual product. Sometimes the person that
Mhm.
you're going to be selling to, the buyer, is actually going to incorporate this into some other downstream automation, which is kind of what often happens with like CVE style data or other AppSec or vulnerability databases. So the downstream presentation is putting it into another machine, and you need to essentially build an API or some consumable data.
Mhm.
But for anything that has a human on the other end, the API is not going to really be relevant for obvious reasons. And so you generally need something like a dashboard or a visualization or a web application that allows them to understand, to summarize, to interpret, or to at least search and filter that data in a useful way. And so presentation has gotten a lot easier over the years. There's so many tools you can use easily, flexibly, open source SaaS products to help with that presentation. But yeah, in some senses, the best way to build these products is to start by outlining or whiteboarding the dashboard that your customer wants with them, if you can get access, and then building backwards from that dashboard or API so that you create exactly what they've said they want.
Okay. And so you had shared a pretty interesting case study, which kind of like really nails home. Like, look, you can do this with almost about anything.
Yeah.
And you'd mentioned that, hey, back in the day, you went out and collected some data around Linux distributions and CVEs, or the vulnerabilities around those Linux distros. Talk to us about, like, so you went out, you got all this stuff, you put it together, and then talk to us about how you monetize, like how you were able to figure out a monetization strategy. What was the value in that exercise to kind of drive this home?
Yeah, and we do that for, I mean, we do that for just about everything under the sun. The open source software like Python or Node,
Hmm.
anything that you might get out of a open source Linux repository like Debian or Ubuntu or all these other package repositories out there. And many organizations have some positive obligation, like from a ISO 27001 or SOC 2, or from a vendor, or sorry, from a purchaser downstream, to keep them up to date or to do something when a vulnerability is known. So,
Hmm.
for example, almost everybody probably familiar with a patching policy that they have or their customers have that requires that they, upon discovery of some kind of vulnerability, patch the thing. And it turns out that at scale, most organizations struggle with that. That's why there's a lot of organizations or tools that create security scanning products for your systems, especially in maybe more so on the Linux or the application side than on the Windows side itself. But the uh, the problem with those is that they often miss stuff or they have a lot of false positives. So if you've worked with a scanning product before, you've probably experienced a lot of false positives where you see a tool that tells you that something's wrong when you know it's not wrong, or you go and you look and you realize it wasn't even the right thing that it said it was. Or you might know there's a problem because you built something or you've seen it with your own eyes, but the tool that you're using that generates the report that you try to use as the artifact for compliance purposes doesn't even produce it. And so that doesn't exactly inspire confidence. And so what we've done is we've tried to take as much of this information out of all these sources that are just sitting around and to enrich it or to clean it so that it's actually consumable for people. So we've gone through like I think it's over 3.5 billion files now in every open source Linux or Python or Node, or even some of the Microsoft stuff, right? Like C Sharp's got NuGet and some of the
Mhm.
WinGet now. So WinGet is, I mean, fascinating to see Microsoft have command line app installs just like Linux distributions with WinGet, and we index every file inside of every one of those things so that if uh, if you've got a fork or a derivative of a product or some tool and the CVE string doesn't match what you actually have or you think you have, then you will still know using this data that you've got a problem, so you can go patch and resolve it or whatever.
Yeah.
And part of what we do is we license or provide this data to other people in the ecosystem so that their products are able to work better. But part of what we do is just look at every file, right? We index billions of files now, which is like a virus total might be a good analogy for people in this space that know virus scanning or virus database as well. So
Mhm.
it's really just a very boring thing, right? You go through, you find every file, you look inside of every file, because if it's an archive or something else, a container, you got to go through it. And then you do things like calculate hashes or fuzzy hashes, or look for things like email addresses or IPs or organization names. And all of that really boring data collection at really large scale turns into a lot of really valuable data, given the fact that software is kind of an important thing these days.
Yeah.
And making sure software is not vulnerable is more than just an important thing. It's in some cases required under federal law or state law or in your customer contract. So
Yeah. And that pile of data, now that it's there and analyzed, it's any number of things. You can sell one-time services, you can sell subscription lookups. There's a infinite number of ways you can go to market into that. And so
yep. We do forensics. We sell it to other AppSec vendors, right? So we use it for copyright violations or scanning to see if somebody's taken your commercial open source library and they've stolen it, if you will, and reusing it in their product. So yeah, we have 4 or 5 different go-to-markets. We also use it to help people value. So if you build something, we can say,
Mhm.
well, okay, your software looks like this. It's got this many lines of this. It's got this kind of structure. It does these kinds of things. Here's another mark, or here's some comparables that we've built based on all this data to say this is worth this much money based on how many hours or market comps. So it it's a good example of that kind of exploratory thing, if you will, where you collect a lot of information and then you have an open mind about who in the world might get value out of it.
And so we've kind of started talking about this, but Mike, give it like, and I've got a couple of questions queued up that I'll hit, but take a couple minutes and just stitch it all home. You and Jill and the rest of the team at License.io, this is kind of what you guys do, what we've just been talking about, correct? Like let
Yeah.
people know kind of what's the 60-second, like here's what License.io does, and here's how we might be able to help you if you're consuming this and thinking about, hey, how could I monetize my data?
Yeah. So I think we have this problem where we do a lot of things for a lot of different people in this abstract way, right? Which is if you've got software or
Mhm.
data, or you want to have software or data, and you want to get value out of it, or you want to make sure you don't accidentally create liability or risk, we help you go end to end. We help you create the data products, to do that in a compliant way, to do that in a way that we think has a defensible, high valuation that meets your needs and your budget, and then in some cases help you go through the due diligence process and actually exit, or broke and help find people to purchase that, or in some cases invest and help you do that. So we do too many things, if I'm being honest, because it makes it hard for people to just get that like one quick elevator pitch of what we do. But the kinds of clients that we really like to work with are generally open-minded and thinking about an exit, right? It it's an owner operator who's either got some software or got some data or got the kind of service business that generates a lot of data exhaust, if you will, and they're
Mhm.
already thinking about, what do I want to do to position myself for the best possible exit or combination. And then we work with them kind of across the board to get there. And and our skill set in particular is around companies who have software or data, and will help you like build a machine learning model and a dashboard, and do that in a way that like your potential acquirer is going to their jaw is going to drop when they see that. That's kind of the best case. But it's a it's an interesting time in this space generally, because so much is obviously changing, and there's so much awareness now in terms of
Mhm.
the value of data and what AI or machine learning can do with the data. So not everybody out there clearly is not going to be able to wake up and decide they're open AI and they have GPT tomorrow, but a lot of people are sitting on a much smaller version of the same story, which is you collect a bunch of data, you do it in a really kind of um, operationally high quality focused way. You set a specific goal and you just kind of build the thing, and you iterate over and over again until you wake up one day and you say, wow, my little whatever company is worth 10 times what I thought it was going to be, and somebody else in the market says no, it's worth 20. And then all of a sudden you're happy that you had an open mind about something and just did the boring stuff really well.
Yeah, that incredible focus on process and procedure really will pay dividends, which is the best advertisement for this webinar series ever. There's a couple of questions that came in. Probably a pretty quick one. Are there any good book recommendations around the concepts we've been talking about? Specifically, there was a request around audiobooks, and almost all books will like either through an AI generated voice or someone who is reading it, like Audible and stuff like that. But any good book recommendations that you have, and then someone can see if they can find an audiobook version of them on the
Yeah,
topic.
I would take that as a item for me to follow up on, because I used to have I teach I used to teach at U of M and University of Michigan. I teach at Michigan State and a couple other places too. So I had a list for students at one point, but it is rather dated because it's been a while since I've taught, and so much has changed in the last year that I don't want to kind of date myself on my go-to book recommendations. Um, I will pick something out, and maybe we can email that out to everybody as a follow-up. Does that sound okay?
Yep, yep, absolutely. And so one other like one other big question is just, if you think about, like, hey, there's GDPR, which is really focusing on people across the pond. Um, uh, but there's the California data privacy
CCPA, yeah.
regulations. There's New York data privacy regulations. What's like if you had to put on a fortune telling hat and throw a dart at the board, what's your prediction in the US specifically around data privacy? Like what's the next 5 to 10 years look like? And we got about 60 seconds, so I'll let you close this out with those thoughts.
Well, somebody else is calling me here too. The short answer is that, as always with federal regulation, it depends on where the next election goes. And the current FTC commissioner, should she continue in her role and the presidential situation stay the way it is now, has taken a warpath against data collection practices. I think it was even in the State of the Union the other day, just in a sentence or two. So condition on the world kind of looking like it does now, I think both ours in Congress and the D's in the executive are probably going to align in a number of ways around data collection practice being a shared kind of area of interest. And the FTC and DOJ haven't always won every one of these pursuits, but like the Weight Watchers example we discussed earlier, they are increasingly winning, and when they win,